Hey, peace to the family. This is Ikemba. Welcome to another episode of We Charge Colonialism. I am Ikemba, head writer of We Charge Colonialism, and our guests are my co-hosts will introduce themselves.
Peace, everyone. My name is Natasha, and I am an educator and a community organizer.
Peace, everyone. This is Frank, host for the Revolutionary Repatriation Educational Lecture Series.
All right, and we're your team for this morning. And as always, want to greet everyone and appreciate you all for tuning in. Make sure that you subscribe to the channel. We Charge Colonialism. We got to get to 3,000. That's our goal. Let's try to get to 3,000 next month or so. And also make sure you're sharing this. You share these discussions. Don't keep it to yourself. Don't be stingy with the information. These are important discussions that we have. We Charge Colonialism is a grassroots think tank. And so our main objective and goal is to combat the colonial education, the colonial media, all the propaganda that's put out to sustain this relationship that they have with African people, which is one of oppression and exploitation. So, we're trying to get back to the root of being a self-determined people, a great African people, and not have this reliance or dependency on a system that isn't made for us. So, with that being said, what we do in this podcast book club, we usually start off giving a weekly roundup and talk about issues around the world pertaining to the African experience. And then in the second half, we go into our book reading. And so we're reading The Falsification of African Consciousness by Dr. Amerson Wilson. I think we have another week on this book right here before we're moving on to conscientism. So just giving you a heads up on that, so we're going to examine Dr. Wilson's work today in the second half of this podcast. Before we proceed, too, I just want to just give another message in regards to what's happening around Mumia Abu Jamal. There's a struggle to bring him home right now. Dr. Matula Shakur just came home. And so we're excited that one of our political prisoners have been released, but we still have many more that are behind the walls. And so with that being said, if you have a platform, you're on social media, I'm going to make an ask that you post a picture or a video or something to raise awareness about Mumia Abu Jamal. The more people that know about Mumia, and those people who do know about Mumia may not be active, at least something that they can do to bring wider awareness to Mumia, who is a political prisoner. And this is someone who joined the Black Panther Party at the age of 14, fighting for the liberation of African people at a young age, survived the assassination by the state, right? And so the least that we can do is post a picture or video to help bring him home. So that being said, we're going to move on into our weekly roundup. Uhuru Amani, Bari Yako, to everybody out there. And so who wants to go first? We ain't even organized who wants to go first. Natasha, I feel like you never go first, so it might be in my mind, but go ahead. You want to start off?
So today's my turn. Okay, yeah, sure. I'm the story that I'm going to be sharing. There were so many things that I wanted to share this week, but I'm like, I think I want to go with this story about the British Army defending its use of dangerous chemicals during training in Samburu in Kenya. So I'll go ahead and share my screen for a second. And I'll just go over a couple of highlighted points that were in the article. And so here, as it says, the British Army defends use of dangerous chemical during training in Samburu. And so one of the things that it says is that though its use is not banned as a weapon, it can cause fire to rain down on targets, inflicting indiscriminate damage, and international law require that it should not be used in areas occupied by civilians. And the chemical that we're talking about is white phosphorus. So, they're defending their use of white phosphorus during military training drills during military drills in Kenya, and saying that it's, only being used under the strict safety precautions. So, there are a couple of things that other things that they raise here. So I'll go through some of the things that I highlighted, and then, I'll give a further analysis of these things. So then it goes on to say that a herdsman, Lauricio Curry, who was living in a nearby village in Samburu, recently told the nation that he fears that it might cause hazardous effects on his livestock. And globally, the use of white phosphorus raised concerns during like the whole Ukrainian-Russian conflict. And just because it is a dangerous chemical. And so, it's already ridiculous that they're using this chemical in Kenya and saying and defending its use by saying that they're using it in controlled ways. And there have been recently, over the past year, there's been this legal issue between the Batuk over a fire that was sparked during military training exercises, and white phosphorus causes fire. And so it destroyed more than 10,000 acres of land. And so when we're thinking about land and colonialism and the police state of colonialism and the military industrial complex that is an arm of colonialism, this is a primary example of it. And they're going to go on to say that, what they're doing and their partnership with the local community, right? These British colonial forces, they engage in community-based projects, and they support education and infrastructure and health and all these other things. And so it also offers employment to what they say over 550 Kenyans, and about 1,500 other casual employees. So those are some of the key things that I wanted to highlight, because I think, one, use for what? So what they're using the white phosphorus for is to train. So what they're saying is they're just using it to as train in terms of their training of these military, so that the British go over into Kenya, I think about like once a year, and their British soldiers and some of the Kenyan soldiers go ahead and practice different military tactics. And in doing that, they're using this white phosphorus. But the problem with the white phosphorus is that, one, it's dangerous to the environment and the people, as we saw when in this article, when they're talking about the way that it, fire is sparked, and it could also cause kidney disease if inhaled too much. It also causes environmental issues when it comes to water, and how water is able to thrive, and organisms are able to thrive within water because of the high levels of phosphorus that that then becomes overpopulated, or increased in levels that it shouldn't be. It should to levels that it should not be at within these different spaces. So obviously inhaling it over time as a person, that's going to be an issue. When we talk about these types of chemicals, in airborne chemicals, they spread over large amounts of areas. It doesn't matter if you're using it in one specific place. We know that any dust or any type of kind of chemical that can be easily blown away with the wind, carried away with the wind, it's going to spread for miles, as is known from different things that have happened over many years, and people have been able to track it. Scientists have been able to track it. So for them to be using it here shows, one, that they're not using it in Britain. They're not using it to train over there. They're going over into Africa, where they feel that the people, it doesn't matter what the health effects are over there. It doesn't matter what it does to the environment over there. You're talking about the burning of 10,000 acres of land when we're talking about places like Kenya, for example, where a lot of white settlers still own a lot of arable land. But now you're doing these military, quote unquote, you're doing these military exercises and you're using this chemical that, one, is dangerous in general, but then two, you're using it in an area where you still have civilians nearby, and you're saying you have the nerve to kind of come out and say, oh, we're going to defend our use of it. And we over there, in Kenya, as Africans, aren't even thinking about the fact that these clearly they wouldn't use it in their country, but they're over here using it in your country and doing it there, and just, putting your people at risk for health issues, putting your environment at risk, and also just going over there and saying, oh, well, we're providing health this and health that. How could you be and it doesn't matter how much money you're putting into helping people in terms of, maybe building health infrastructure, when you're causing health issues with what you're doing already in general. Like, that doesn't even make sense. And then when we're talking about what benefit you're getting, what kind of education, really, right? What kind of education are you getting by having this military base there? And also, I mean, the use of military bases in all of these African countries is a whole nother issue in general. But these are just some of the things I wanted to highlight based on this story.
Hey, this is a very important story, and it raises so many contradictions. Thanks for bringing us this story. Some of the things that come to mind, you had hit the the hammer on the nail when you said that why aren't they doing it in Britain? This is the problem under colonial capitalism. We're dealing with African people as a colonized people, and as a colonized people, our survival under this system is dependent on the colonizer, because it's an economic system that's dominated and under the control of the colonizers. So no matter who you have in politics, blackface, we talk about neo-colonialism, right? Blackface, it doesn't matter. The political institutions, all institutions is dependent on the success of the economy. If the economy falters, those institutions will falter. And so, and I raise this to say that Kenya, for instance, because of this economic dependency, as a nation, those people who are in positions of power are willing to prostitute the country, prostitute themselves, and to get resources for their special benefit, where the masses of African people are going to suffer as a result. They're the ones who are going to be affected by this decision that's being made. So it's a serious problem, because the question that I ask is like, who allowed for this to happen? Who was the one who made the decision to say, hey, you can do this here? Go somewhere in Europe and put the Europeans in danger. And then the other side of it is military manufacturing these military weapons. The European is always had, and the Asian too, is that it could be argued about them as well. You look at their history, they developed a war economy. They've been war with each other for centuries, for millenniums, right? And so this is just this continuation of this war economy. It shows us as African people what we need to do to be able to survive within the system. We can't continue to be dependent on them for protection, resources and everything, when we have everything in Africa. So, it's a lot to be said on this, but Frank, you wanted to add something, go right ahead.
Yeah, I don't know. This whole Kenya here is one of the countries in Africa, to be specific as well. I'm not saying just Kenya, but it's one of the countries in Africa where a lot of stuff start from there. Just to even get to this aspect, Bill Gates is already in Africa right now, even in Kenya, and saying that he carried HIV medication that people would take, I think they will live for 60 days, all of those things. And he want to go to help African people to solve sicknesses and things. And to be frank, this guy, he's a liar, because this is the man that fighting for depopulation of the African continent. And then how can he come back and say he's going to provide drugs to save African people? And that just relates to this whole chemical issue in Kenya there. First of all, if it was something, or if it is something beneficial for mankind, It will never be done on the African continent. It will be done in Europe or in Great Britain. There have been nothing that have been that is beneficial or have been beneficial to mankind that these so-called Europeans have taken to the African continent, okay, to start the process there or to study there or to give it to African people. If it's something beneficial for mankind or to promote mankind, it will always be done in their country and on their continent, and they will always disregard African people, okay? But now, how are you going to do a military drill, okay, in Africa? And this is not where you're going to fight your war. You're going to fight your war in Europe. You're going to fight your war in Great Britain or whosoever you're going to fight, not Africa. African people don't want to fight Great Britain, and African people don't even have the dream of fighting Great Britain. So go and do your drill in Great Britain or either to Russia, go and do your drill there. But in Africa, why are you doing drill in Africa? You know, especially with a chemical. Now you said a chemical is not dangerous. If it is not dangerous, okay, anything that have an effect, okay, on the vegetation, okay, on naturally made, then how about the human body? If these things is so harmful to the extent that it can cause fire, okay, it can cause wildfire, that just tells you the little that human being going to inhale is going to kill them. That just tell you the water body in our area have been contaminated. That just tell you our food and vegetable and crops we grow in our area all have been contaminated with those chemicals. And if we eat those foods or those fruit and drink that water or those water, it's going to have effect on us. Okay? So in the first place, let's go to the Kenyan authority. Why are the Kenyan authority, or why did they allow them, okay, these people to come and do military drill every year on the African continent or every year in Kenya? These things not supposed to be happening. If they want to do their drill, let them do their drill in England. They have land in England. They have military bases in England. They can do their drill there instead of them doing their drill in Africa and putting African lives in danger. Let them put the European or the British people life in danger, then they'll put our life in danger. That is just to say they look out as 3/5 of a lesser human being. They don't look out as human being. They look out as inferior. If they can do these things in Africa, they don't do it in Great Britain or in a Western country, and they go and do it in Africa, they look at us as inferior. And because we allow them to do these things, they will continue doing it with no remorse. We need to tell these people to stop. And I said to the Kenyan people, do not sit. Get on your feet and get to the government and hold the government responsible. Let the government take these people serious and hold them responsible. But if you say that, the government will continue, or the authority will continue to allow these people and give them some crumbs and allow them to come and put your life in danger. It is not about the authority in Kenya, it is about the people. So you guys have to wake up as well and bring this to light. Even though as we bring it to light, we also rely on you people in Kenya to bring it to light.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, appreciate that analysis, Frank, for sure. When we're gonna move on, because I think like this dependency, again, like these decisions has a lot to do with dependency on other people for resources. And the contradiction is that you have all of the resources. This is why Pan-Africanism is so important. African unity, developing the philosophy of Africans working with each other with a goal and objective to be a self-determined people. Uganda, going to the next story, Uganda is an example of kind of another contradiction that's being raised. And actually, Yoweri Museveni, who's the president of Uganda, and I can't pull the story up right now, but he slams the Western countries for this double standard over coal mines. And so, first of all, there has been a pledge by the Western countries in 2012 to give developing nations, what they call developing nations, so, Africa, the poor nation, the colonized nations of the world, right, to give them resources of $100 billion a year so that they can make a transition from using fossil fuels. Because we're moving to this new standard, of being what is it, environmental friendly, right? Using environmental friendly energy. And so that raises a contradiction right there in regards to, again, just having this dependency, right? We have to depend, as African people, we have to depend on the West, depend on the colonizer to give us resources to be able to survive in the changing economy where they have the resources and they don't have to, you know what? So when you in a relationship like that, you're always going to be underneath those people who are giving you those resources. You'll never be equal or more powerful than the person who is feeding you. Unless you decide one day to say, hey, you know, I'm going to take the means of production for myself and feed myself, right? And so what is happening is during the Ukraine war, Russia has cut off Europe from access to certain energy sources, and now Europe is in need to use coal again. And so, with that being said, they kind of are throwing out the policies of transitioning off of coal and oil. And Yoweri Museveni is calling out that contradiction because when he struck a deal to continue to use coal as fuel, because as developing nations, we don't have, because we've been underdeveloped through colonialism, we haven't had the means to develop the sort of technology to be able to do certain things on our own. And with that being said, Europe was trying to stop Uganda from being independent, using coal, using fossil fuels. And it's not about, you know, we can talk about the environment all day, but the West was able to develop or get where it was by using these same resources that they're trying to prevent Africa from using. And so if they want to make that transition, that's cool. But if us changing and adopting certain technologies or a certain economy, I should say, means that we have to be dependent on another people, then hey, we can continue to do what we're doing if it means us being independent. And so this is, Lori, again, just like another thing they pledged in 2020 that they were going to give this $100 billion. They haven't yet, or there hasn't been a date where they're going to even what's the word I'm trying to say, commit to the pledge that they said that they were going to give $100 billion. They haven't given any of that yet. And again, it just raises the contradiction of being dependent on the West for these resources. So yeah, so that's my story. Wanted to see if y'all had any thoughts about that.
I think one of the thoughts that I have is that because I was reading up a story about the G27, I mean the COP27, and how they had only like agreed to 2 things so far during all of this time, and you know it's coming to a close, and really that whole you know, because that's all COP27 all about climate change and the agreements that countries are going to make. You know, in general, Europeans are just not going to stop doing what they want to do. Like they're not going to stop doing using fossil fuels in the way that they say that they want to. They're basically just going to continue to do what they want to do, knowing that the environment is gonna come, you know, it's gonna come at a cost to the environment and to other people's lives. Because when we think about like even climate change in general, right? Most of the countries that are still producing majority of all of the carbon emissions and things like that are still these European countries and these multinational European countries also. So I think that's one that, of course, they would go back to, you know, saying using coal, because they're like, you know, well, whatever. They, you know, as much as they talk about it, they're not really about it. I feel like indigenous people are the ones who are, you know, who are more concerned with doing something that's actually going to make an adjustment toward how what's happening with the environment and climate change. Because as indigenous people, when we think about ourselves as African people and, you know, our place on the world, like, you know, what we were doing before was protecting the planet, right? Protecting the environment. We cared about living alongside everything else that was on the earth in a way that didn't destroy or didn't exacerbate any natural occurrences or any natural cycles. Europeans don't care anything about that. So as much as they can talk about climate change, they're really not fitting to really do what they need to do, because if they were, a lot of these corporations would have stopped doing the things that they were that they've been doing, and they haven't stopped at all. So I think that's what, it really points out, that Europeans are just going to keep doing what they're going to do for its benefit, no matter what they say when it comes to climate change. And so for us, the question is really, where are we trying to go? Because if we're going to continue to try to go to where, the Europeans were, we're going to try to continue to follow this industrialization model, then yeah, of course you're going to figure out, you're going to say, okay, how can I create, what can I use to industrialize? And then you're going to follow that same process. So I think for us, the question is, where do we want to go? Where is it that, as African people, as, countries on the African continent, where is it that we're trying to go? Because that's what's going to tell us what we should be doing and where we should be investing our money and our, mental capacities and ingenuity.
Yeah, in fact, I could say something else too. Like they're dictating the changes in the economy, right? And that's the problem. They're dictating these changes, and we're following along. Whatever the change is going to be, and that's why whatever issues that we have with Yoweri, he's bringing up a valid argument in regards to this double standard, right? When it comes to European nations and developing nations, they're going to develop policies, this change to environmental friendly technologies, because they have the capability to do those things, right? Where the underdeveloped nations don't have the access to the resources to be able to develop the technologies to compete with them. So now for us to get those technologies to make this change, again, like, it's this dependency. We got to get resources from them. And then when they have the technology, we have to pay to use those technologies by going through them, their corporations and their people. But, I think like this is a serious, issue, and something that we have to be very conscious of and not be afraid. Like at the time before European contact, right, the nations around the world, we were all developing, maybe at different, rates, but we were all developing on our own. It's this relationship that we've had with the European, where they were able to advance by everyone by oppressing and exploiting the labor of everyone else. That's the only reason that they're more advanced in regards to just like technology right now, because they're not more advanced than anything else, and talk about values and spirituality. But go ahead, Frank. I'm sorry, man.
Yeah, let me just add to that. You see, the relationship between the West and Africa is like a man or a woman in an unproductive relationship that can now be productive. And that man or the woman is unable to leave because he or she have been conditioned that if you leave, you will not survive, or you cannot survive on your own. So you can only survive if you stay in this relationship and I keep exploiting you. That's the kind of relationship the West have with the African continent. And to be specific, African people have been conditioned in the mind frame that if we leave Europe or if we leave the West, we will not survive. We will find it difficult to survive because we do not have the resources. And when I say the resources, I'm not talking about the natural resources. I'm talking about the capital. And the reality here is that capital is nothing. It's just a leaf. And what they fail to understand, or what we fail to understand as African people, is that what the West want is what we have, not specifically the money. It's the resources that they want, and that's what we have. And until we can realize that, we will not live in that unproductive relationship with the West. Now, Walter Rooney talked about this in his book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa is Dead. And he said, for Eastern African people realize the importance of their resources and want to take control of their resources, that's the time the West come out, the colonizer come out to put value tag on the resources and say it's no longer valuable, okay? It's no longer important. And they do that just to make African people to fall back. In Walter Rooney, he said it. He said that's the time they will come out to say it's no longer important, it's no longer valuable, because they determine the prices, okay, of the goods. They determine the prices of the resources, not African people. And that's why we goes wrong, because if we own something, we have to determine the value, the price, or the commodity on the market than the colonizer. And the colonizer consistently, they keep doing it to the African continent and to all the African nations around the world where there are resources. And this is where we get it wrong. And until we can leave that kind of mindset of relationship, we will continue to be in it. Under no circumstances, Europe or the West or the colonizer should decide, okay, for African people at this time, should decide for African people as to what we should do with our resources or what we shouldn't do with it. Like Natasha said, the COP27, when you read the doctrine of the European, even before meeting African leaders, they stated it clear. They are not in any readiness to work with African people to conduct on how climate change supposed to affect Africa. The reason why they are meeting African people is to continue the control of resources, of the African resources, so that by 2050, okay, Europe will be at the place it is, either the second in the world and America being the first in the world. That is their stand with this whole climate change. This climate change is about how they can control the African resources. It's about how they can control the African mind. It's about how they can give billions or trillions of dollars to change the perception of African people in becoming a self-determined people, in taking, how they call it, decision based on their struggle or based on their experience. That is why this whole COP27 is about. And I read it yesterday, they stated it clear. If they say if African people want to, how they call it, plan for climate change, they themselves should do it, and Europe or America will not come to give them any idea. Now, if you have that kind of mindset, then why should we come to you to collaborate with you to work together to create climate change? Why not we African people, we sit down on the African continent, okay, and coordinate our things among ourselves as to what we need to do with climate change?
Yeah, I say for that, and as you were speaking, I was again just thinking about you brought up this again. We've been talking about this dependency, right, throughout this first half hour, and I'm just thinking, if you look at Europe on the map, Western Europe in particularly on the map, how are these people dominating the world like the rest of the world? How are they able to do it? But I think it was just like the mindset that they have, like Africa. One clue that we have in regards to how Africa was living and the mindset that African people had, like we weren't living life with a mind, in a desperate state. We weren't in a desperate state. We weren't living in a state of desperation. Europeans were at the time when they went across. You think about them going across the Atlantic, like uncharted waters for them to try to find another route to India and Asia for resources. Right? Like they were in a state of desperation. And I think it's that state of desperation is why they were able to take advantage of everywhere that they went, because we weren't living in a state of desperation. What African people didn't need to leave Africa, when we had conversations about, them and exploring the world, they had to do that. We were perfectly fine where we were. We had the resources. And so I say that to say is like, this is the mind state of the people that we're dealing with right now. So even when going back to your story, Natasha, manufacturing weapons, they're ready for war. They're still in a state of desperation. And so we have to have a sense of urgency and maybe be in a state of desperation in regards to us needing to save African lives if we can, because African people are dying by the millions every year as a result of this relationship that we have with these colonizers. So, we don't have to be like them, but I think like we need to definitely change our mindset and be more revolutionary in our actions and thought. I don't know if y'all had any thoughts on that. I know Frank, you got a story. You want to do your?
Let me just add to what you just said. We can skip my story and then get into the reading. You touched on something. The reason why the European nation or America or the colonizer are at this stage is because, number one, they kill people, genocide. Number two, they lie to people. Three, they exploit people. Okay, that is why they are at the stage. And in order to continue to be at that stage, they have to continue the killing, the lying, the exploitation, and the dehumanization of human beings. That's the only way they can continue to be at that stage.
Yeah, and indeed. So we're going to transition into the book reading, which is important. It connects to what we're talking about too, in regards to the mindset that we need to have and the psychology of people that we're dealing with. The falsification of African consciousness, and we're starting from page 45. If you joined this late, make sure you subscribe to our channel. We charge colonialism. Make sure you like, make sure you share. From what I don't know nothing about, this YouTube stuff, but everybody says it, and I guess that works, right? To get people to follow you. So make sure you're doing those things. So we're gonna go to page 45. If you want to put it on the screen. I'm not able to do it, but if you want to.
Yeah, I'll share my screen. I'm
Okay.
sending it to page 45, and then.
All right. And also, for those people who want to support the work that we are doing, make sure that you become a Patreon member and visit our website. You can donate through our website as well. Maybe if you don't want to become a member, there's other ways that you can support us. And make sure that you visit our website and look at some of the latest articles that we have. I have the latest one, short article, which is going to be a series of articles that I'm writing on colonial education and its impact on the African mind. So, and its continuing impact, because we still dealing with colonial schools.
All right, I'm ready.
All right. So again, page 45, we're starting from the economics of maladjustment. It's not up though yet, right?
It has to be brought onto stage. I don't know how that works. I'm sharing it.
Frank, are you able to do it? I could just read. Hopefully, there's a link though to the book, and should be a link to the book in the chat, so you guys can follow along that way as well. So let's get into it.
On the screen.
Say that again.
I said eventually it'll be up on the screen.
Okay.
Yeah, I said just be reading. I'll pull it out. Just be reading.
The economics of maladjustment. Why do we suffer from this problem then? Why is the Black personality created? I try to get across the fact that every maladjusted characteristic in the Black personality serves an economic function. Each maladjusted characteristic is not there by accident. It's not there simply because Europeans hate us. It's there because it maintains their economic dominance. If I got money, I can help you. But if I distrust you, I won't help you, and you may not make it. It's not the absence of money, it's the presence of mistrust. If I will not cooperate, if you cannot rely on me, then we cannot have an economic system, even though we may have money. In other words, a people must trust, be reliable, be dependable, have respect for each other if they are to develop a viable economic system. When they have those kinds of relationships, they have a social system, and they can build and they can grow economically. Suspiciousness and other negatives are implanted in the collective Black personality so that African people cannot challenge European people, even though we are a majority of the people on this earth and we live over the riches of this earth. A people who do not share history, who do not appreciate the shared experiences that their history represents, are people who cannot utilize mutual trust, dependability, and so forth upon which to build an economic social system. African people who forget their history are people who forget that they had an economy before the European came into existence. They are people who forget that their economy was developed and maintained prior to the European imperial ascendancy. Let me quote something here about a people who didn't forget some part of this history. These are African people cited in the New York Times Monday, November 30th, 1987. The article is called Informal Capitalism Grows in Cameroon. When Samuel Nancy needed 35,000 to open his Joy de Vivre bar here, he did not bother with banks. Instead, he turned to is that Totines or Totines? I think it's Totines, an informal credit system rooted in African tradition. Without signing a paper or filling out a form, Mr. Nancy emerged from his monthly tontine meeting with 35,000 in cash. Before I go on, I think there's some stuff that we can build on really here, in regards, because one thing he said that made me think about Sankofa was on page 45. He said, if I can remember, he said, African people who forget their history are, this at the bottom, second paragraph. African people who forget their history are people who forget that they had an economy before the European came into existence, right? And it made me think of Sankofa, because Sankofa is a philosophy that African people must adopt in order to overturn this what he's talking about, the falsification of African consciousness, right? To combat that, there has to be this look towards the past, not being afraid to fetch what was once lost. And developing that philosophy, we can begin to look at our experiences, our historical experiences, through our own lens, and use our history as a basis to build upon, rather than like looking at Europeans. Again, it's like we're always following and trying to emulate the European and their way of life, their culture, their values, and so forth, when we had culture and values of our own that I'm going to argue was far more superior, and the reason I argue that, because we didn't have this war economy. We weren't building, even though I'm not going to say that there wasn't any conflict on the continent, but we weren't trying to wipe out and colonize and enslave people and develop a slaveocracy. We weren't doing things like that. People were enslaved because it was in prison. But that's a whole nother, history. But that stood out to me, and then he made another, a point when he was talking about just the mistrust, like with the type of mindset that's needed for us to develop a viable economy. And the mistrust that we have, our inability as the masses of Africa, the African working class, who are the producers of everything you see in the society, the reason why we haven't been able to develop an economy among ourselves is because of this mistrust that has been instilled in us through the propaganda, through the miseducation, and through this idea of individualism. So this pursuit for our individual profit, I'm looking at everyone around me as competition. And last point I'll make on this, and one thing I was thinking in regards to what we have to do with our schools is develop an education built on socialist principles. So what we do in society reflects what we're learning in the schools. If what's happening in society is any reflection, and the African community is any reflection of what's happening in the schools, we know that the schools is failing us. We can just go out into the community. We don't even have to go into the schools. But I think we have to make sure that we develop a school curriculum that's African-centered and that is built on socialist principles, where the children are learning how to cooperate and work together to better their community, rather than looking at each other as, I'm competing. Oh, I got an A. Oh, I only got a C. Like, I'm doing better than you. That sort of thing. But I'm gonna pass it on. I know I went on, but if y'all had any thoughts.
I agree with you. The mistrust or the distrust that exists within our community across continents and land masses is definitely something that, as Amos Wilson says, is a hindrance to us being able to build communities. Because, like he says here, if I don't trust you, then I'm not willing to give you money. I'm not willing to cooperate with you. If I feel like you're not going to cooperate, then that means I can't rely on you and I can't trust you, and therefore I can't build anything with you. And when we're talking about economics, what we're really talking about is, the interaction between community members in a way that allows everybody to get the things that they need. And so if you can't even trust people enough to be able to build community with them, then you're definitely going to have an issue building up your economic practices and your economic system and your economic grounding. So I think this point about trust is really important, because I think it infects every single thing that we can think of, whether it comes to us being able to build community, but also with us being able to form organizations and to build and grow organizations, because people still have this trust that has been sown amongst us, especially when we think about COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program that was run by the FBI, that infiltrated so many different Black organizations that were building community and trying to build and create economic bases. And so this idea of continuing to sow mistrust, it's always been a colonial tactic to sow mistrust within societies in order for you to be able to break them down and not allow them to be able to be cohesive or form any type of unity. And so I think this idea of trust is really, really important. And we have to, work on building trust with each other and trusting each other to the point where we can, and even sometimes just taking leaps of faith too, when not saying that you're going to go organize and partner with just anybody, but that when you've trusted enough that you're going to go out there and build with other people that to a good extent, and just hope, and obviously with making sure that you're doing all your other due diligences, that you can start to build in that kind of way, because we can't continue to let this issue of trust hold us back in the way that it has.
Yeah, just to add to that, and that's one aspect where, again, we keep talking about colonialism, and we keep talking about Western, form of education. And the more and more we continue to use the Western form of interpretation of how things supposed to be done, that is how exactly, right, we're going to keep going against one another. That is how exactly we're going to keep exploiting one another, and not even realizing that we are exploiting ourselves. We are exploiting, our own people, our own nation, our own continent, right, our own community. Now realizing that we're exploiting our belonging, our inheritance for the benefit of the colonizer, or we are being used, by the colonizer to do these things. Okay, and you mentioned education. One good example in Kima, you mentioned education, right? I can tell you, before then, when you look at the African, perspective, right? Before European perspective that came and manipulated African mindset, right? Even in schools, there was no competition where you don't want for your friend to score grades more than you. Like, everybody learn together, everybody share idea. That is why they call oral, education, right? So through oral education, everybody got to know everything. Everybody scored grades the same. No one was like, oh, I am the expert, I am the more experienced person. But with the colonial mindset, even with education, among Africans don't even want to help their friends, right? To even elevate or to even teach them to pass their class, because they want to be known in the classroom as the most brilliant students among his or her friend, and which is sad. And with that mentality of that mindset, it is a colonial mindset, because we are not there to help each other. We are not there to create generation, right, of brilliant people. Okay, because we want to compete with one another. We want to be known as the most brilliant person in the classroom, as the most brilliant person in the community, as the most brilliant person, whatsoever the situation may be, and which is sad. That have never been African form of education. African form of education have been everybody come together, everybody learn, and everybody have experience and build the community and build a system. And that is why we build a system in Africa, the pyramid in Africa, right? To the extent that even up to now, Europeans are still confused that these people were not educated, but how did they build this? And they came out with a narrative to say it was some alien, right, that came in Africa that taught African people how to build a pyramid, right? They say it was some alien, but up to today, they have never proved it where those aliens come from. And if you can't prove it where those aliens come from, then why can't you give the credit to African people?
Yeah, that's a fact. That's a fact, right? Hey, let me go on to the next. Good point. Hey, they gonna give credit to alien before they do that. I mean, that's telling, man. That's really, they don't even need no bones, right? Everything else, like, yeah, I want to at least see the bones. If you ain't got no writing, let me see the bones. But when it comes to that, like, archaeologists, man, it's not enough. So I'm on page 46, at the top, first paragraph. I tell people, that's where I'm at. I tell people there's no such thing as a black bank. There's not a black bank in existence. There's no such animal, whether Freedom, Freedom National Carver, etc. None of them are black banks. Anytime you have a bank regulated by another people and by another people's rules, it's not yours. You're just there. On another occasion, I show you where the presence of black banks have retarded black economic development, not advanced it. Other groups will have moved into economic existence and control before they even build it. After they build an economic base, then you'll see them build a bank, not the other way around. But dominated people who don't know themselves do it backwards. They build a bank and don't even have anything to invest in, ignoring the fact that banks make money by loans and investments. That's why black banks have suffered. We have to build a basic economic mom and pop base first. It is through lending people money this way and so forth, that a banking system grows, not the other way around. But the Negro starts with the bank first because it makes him look good. It retards us and then puts us under the rule of another people. They tell us that we can do only this, that, and the other thing with our money. Let us use our money under our own rules and regulations. Why can't we raise 35,000 and build ourselves fruit stands and build the stores we want, or do something else with it? It's in our tradition. But if we suffer from amnesia, then tradition is not available to us. Yet here's a people, the Cameroonians, who remember tradition, and their remembrance of their past and tradition permits them to perform economically. Who says that history is not connected with economics? Do not let anyone tell us that lie from this day on. For years, development economists saw African totems as archaic tribal institutions that would die out with the rise of modern economies based on European-style banking systems. In other words, we see the European banking systems were expected to destroy native systems, which is what they have done in too many African countries. The banks are killing our creativity and capacity to use the money that we have in our own pockets. Again, I think like there's something else to build on. I'm gonna read this quote. But now many economists see the totems as a highly efficient method of promoting roots efforts in capitalism. They cite Cameroon. In the first half of the 1980s, this Central African nation had the continent's highest average economic growth rate, 7% a year. Cameroonians rate the rate of participation in tontines. I hope I'm pronouncing it. I'm probably, if someone know how to pronounce that, I'm probably killing their ears right now. But these tontines, the highest, 47% was the highest in 5 French-speaking African countries, surveyed by Marcomer Gallup International. By contrast, only 13% of the people surveyed in the 5 nations had savings accounts. Banks don't match the mentality of the people, said Theodorette Marie Fancy, the director of an economic consulting firm here. They are colonial structures. So just to build on that, I think, again, he raises a great point in regards to another people's rules, under another person's power. You're developing an institution where somebody else is controlling the rules. You're not really in control of that institution then, because your behavior or what you do is influenced by the rules of the system, the rules that have been created by those who control the system. And so we talked about earlier when I brought up the story with what's happening in Uganda. I think that's an example of how the European wants developing, or quote unquote developing nations to abide by their rules and to move as they are moving, where Uganda said, no, we're going to do things this way. They're going against the grain. And one of the things that the president had raised was, even if the people, the Europeans were trying to get them to stop using coal, and they said, hey, we're going to go on with this project, And if our contractors want to break the contract and do what the Europeans are telling them to do, then we're going to find other contractors. So they're like, we're going to move forward regardless of what you guys are saying. And that's what we need to do as African people, is like, we have to, as long as we're a part of this political economy playing by their rules, we're not in control. The most revolutionary thing that we can do is to develop an economy of our own amongst ourselves. And if anybody wants to do business with us, they have to do it on our terms. After World War II, there was a new world order put in place by these Europeans. They came with the IMF, the World Bank. These are international institutions. And then the World Trade Organization came later, the WTO. They're setting the rules of this political economy. And that's why they come together and have these summits, right, that we're excluded from. And they're talking about how they're going to move forward in this political economy. And there's not a single African sitting at the table. And if they are there, they're there only as observers. They don't have no voice. What's this? The Berlin Conference all over again. So I think it's really important. This is an important point that he brought up. I don't know if y'all had any
I think, just to add on to your point about the way in which after World War II, right, these new systems were set up, the UN, the IMF, the World Bank, in order to control and to also be an arm in ensuring capitalism as the type of economic system that is predominant around the world. And so I think that the fact that these European powers were successful, knowing, right, they were knowing that, okay, these countries are fighting for freedom, and that they're going to have freedom whether we want them to or not. And so what do we do in order to make sure that we still control the way that these economic systems and the resources are used and who has access to them? Well, let's create things like the IMF. Let's create this idea of development, because they're always trying to get Africa to develop, where even the terms of developed nations and underdeveloped nations all fall within this idea of controlling the worldwide economic systems, no matter what part of the country we're in. I mean, no matter what part of the world that you're in, no matter where your country is, and ensuring this globalization that allows for Europeans to continue to go into any country that they want and be able to instill any type of policies, economic policies that they want. So because all of these countries are made to really stay under capitalism and use capitalism as their form of economic system, it makes it easier for colonial systems, economic colonial systems, to continue to operate today, because of the fact that we have these structures that allow capitalism to flourish and be the only and be made to be the only viable type of economic system that can exist.
Yeah, and just to add to that, like what you guys said, that's the mentality of the colonizer. It is either by their rules or no rules. And we have seen that recently, just this week in Burkina Faso, where the Burkina Bees decided to make resources nationalist, and the company that the mining company that had the company that the man had been taken from them, what they did, they went ahead and got angry and said, if we can't mine, right, if we can't be in charge, we either destroy our property. So that just means either our rules or no rules. And they went ahead and destroy the property, that we will not leave our property here, and then you use them to benefit from you, to benefit from it. But the reality here is you have been exploiting these resources, this land, since 1884. Okay? Why not, if the people are taking it, why can't you even have some remorse on you as a human being to leave those material there? But you destroy them. I mean, for God's sake, that's not how human beings supposed to behave. You destroy those material, you look at those material, you destroy it. The reality here is you can kill, and they don't even have no remorse if they are even killing African, or they are even killing human beings. That's just to say that these people, right, whenever they come to African people, with an agenda, with an agreement. They have already sat down, right, among themselves and have their meeting on how they can come and control African and how they can come and convince the minds of African. They have already had their Berlin conference meeting already. They have already had their European or the American or Washington DC meeting before meeting African people. So when they come there, they are not coming. What they are saying that that's not what they are saying. They already said what they want to say. So they are just trying to convince you to get along with them so that you can go with their rules. And we African at this time, right? We supposed to stand revolutionary and say, no, we do not want no attachment with you. We do not want no business partner with you. Because for every time we get into business with you, we end up losing. We end up being a follower. We end up being a servant to you. And we do not want to be a servant. If anybody is to be a servant, it should be you, because we have the material that you want. African people, this time around, if we are to go back to the beginning and start all over, right? And start producing material to manufacture our resources. Let us do it. We have the knowledge before and we still have the knowledge.
Oh, Ashe. Oh, you wanted to raise something, Natasha?
No.
Okay. So yeah, thanks for both of you raising those powerful points, and I hope that everybody is tuned in got something out of this discussion. And again, make sure you liking and sharing this. I want to appreciate everybody that joined us this morning and continues to join us every week as we continue to talk about this, but also put this into practice. We want to build the institutions. We charge colonialism as one institution, but we have to build many institutions to address all of the problems that we have and do some building as African people. And to separate ourselves. That's the message, like I'm a separatist. I say it all the time. I'm gonna do what I have to do now, but my goal is like to get on the other side of the fence. And so I'm looking for people to help me get on the other side of the fence. So with that being said, I want to appreciate you again. And hopefully see you next week, same time, 10 a.m. So peace. Uhuru.